Professor Daniel Morgan had never been one to break rules. His decades-long academic career was built on intellectual rigor and professional boundaries. Even as he approached 50, his passion for literature remained undimmed, evidenced by the animated discussions he led in his graduate seminars at Westfield University. He had long since resigned himself to the quiet rhythms of academic life. Early mornings with coffee and research, afternoons of lectures and office hours, evenings alone with his books and classical music. It was a life that had grown comfortable, if somewhat predictable. Emma Chen wasn't like most doctoral candidates. At 34, she had already lived several lives: corporate lawyer, humanitarian worker, and now aspiring professor of comparative literature. Her eyes carried the weight of experience, a quality that distinguished her from others in Daniel's seminar on literary ethics. When she spoke in class, the room fell silent, captivated not just by her insight, but by the conviction with which she delivered them. "I disagree, Professor Morgan," Emma said one autumn afternoon, her voice clear in the seminar room where sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting patterns on the worn wooden table. "Kundera isn't suggesting moral relativism here. He's interrogating how ethical frameworks collapse under political pressure." Daniel looked up from his notes, surprised by the challenge but intrigued. Few students dared to counter his interpretation so directly. "An interesting perspective, Miss Chen. Would you elaborate?" As Emma spoke, gesturing with elegant hands that punctuated her arguments, Daniel found himself listening more intently than he had in years. Her analysis was not just competent, it was revelatory, connecting threads in the text he had never considered. When class ended, students filtered out, but Daniel and Emma remained, their debate continuing as twilight descended outside. "You've given me much to reconsider," Daniel admitted, gathering his papers. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion? My office hours tomorrow?" Emma smiled, a subtle curve of her lips that seemed to transform her entire face. "I'd appreciate that, Professor." What began as intellectual discourse evolved imperceptibly over the following weeks. Office hours extended beyond their allotted time, conversations drifting from Kundera and Calvino to personal histories, Daniel's childhood in rural Vermont, Emma's upbringing between Taipei and Chicago, her disillusioning years in corporate law, his divorce 15 years prior. They discovered shared passions for obscure poetry, hiking in the mountains, and the same small jazz club downtown, where they'd somehow never crossed paths. The line between mentorship and friendship blurred gradually, a progression so natural that neither acknowledged its unusual nature until it was impossible to ignore. They maintained a careful distance on campus, Professor Morgan and Ms. Chen in corridors and classrooms, but in conversations that stretched into evening, they were simply Daniel and Emma, two people who found in each other an intellectual equal, a kindred spirit. "This can't lead anywhere," Daniel told himself repeatedly, staring at his reflection in his bathroom mirror one December morning. The university's policies were clear about relationships between faculty and students, regardless of age or circumstances. He had watched colleagues destroy careers over similar situations, yet when his phone chimed with texts from Emma, thoughtful observations about books he'd recommended or questions about his research, his resolve weakened. Emma wrestled with similar doubts in her small apartment near campus. She had returned to academia to rebuild her life after years in a career that had slowly drained her soul. The last thing she needed was a complication that might jeopardize her future. Yet Daniel's presence in her life had become essential. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, his passionate defenses of lesser-known writers, how he listened to her, as though her words mattered more than his own. The pivotal moment came during winter break, when campus emptied and the pressure of maintaining appearances temporarily lifted. They met at a bookstore in a neighboring town, far from potential observers, spending hours exploring dusty shelves before settling in a corner cafe. I've been meaning to ask, Emma said, warming her hands around a mug of spiced cider, snowflakes melting in her dark hair. Why did you never remarry after your divorce? Daniel considered the question, watching the steam rise from his coffee. I suppose I never found someone who made me want to risk that kind of vulnerability again. He paused, aware he was treading dangerous ground. Until recently, their eyes met across a small table and something shifted between them. An unspoken acknowledgement of what had been building for months. Emma reached out, her fingers briefly touching his hand before withdrawing. We should be careful, she whispered. I know, he replied, his voice equally soft. But careful wasn't enough. When classes resumed in January, their determination to maintain purely professional interactions crumbled in the face of their growing connection. A brush of hands while exchanging papers, lingering glances during seminars. The magnetic pull that seemed to draw them together despite their better judgment. All conspired against the resolve. On a frigid evening when winds howled across campus, Emma came to Daniel's office with questions about her dissertation proposal. The discussion was productive, scholarly, until it wasn't. A momentary silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. We can't keep pretending, Emma finally said, standing by the window, where campus lights twinkled in the early darkness. Daniel rose from behind his desk, crossing to stand beside her. What are you suggesting? I don't know, she admitted. I just know that I'm tired of denying what's happening. The first kiss was hesitant, a tentative crossing of boundaries they had both sworn to respect. The second was not. Daniel pulled away first, his professional ethics waging war with desires he had suppressed for months. If anyone found out, he began. Emma nodded, understanding the implications. I know the risks as well as you do, but I also know that at some point, fear of consequences becomes an excuse for not living authentically. They agreed to profound discretion. No communication on campus outside of formal settings, no discernible change in their academic relationship, no confiding in friends or colleagues. Emma would complete her coursework with other professors, removing Daniel from direct evaluation of her progress. It was a fragile arrangement built on careful calculations, and the hope that their 4-month age difference and Emma's maturity would mitigate judgments if the relationship ever became known. For a time, it worked. Winter melted into spring, and their relationship deepened in private moments stolen between academic obligations. Weekend drives to coastal towns, dinners in restaurants where they wouldn't be recognized, nights spent discussing literature and life in Daniel's apartment outside city limits. They discovered in each other not just intellectual compatibility, but emotional resonance. Emma's determination and clear-eyed perspective balanced Daniel's occasional tendency toward melancholy. His steadiness anchored her when doubts about her career change surfaced. Do you ever regret this? Daniel asked one evening as they walked along a deserted beach, waves crashing against rocks in the gathering dusk. Emma considered the question, her expression thoughtful. I regret the necessity for secrecy, but not us. Never us. Yet secrets have weight, and carrying theirs began to take a toll. Daniel grew paranoid about casual glances from colleagues, interpreting innocent remarks as veiled accusations. Emma withdrew from her cohort, afraid of revealing too much during casual conversations. The strain of compartmentalizing their relationship affected them both, creating tensions that occasionally flared into arguments. You barely looked at me during my presentation today, Emma said during one such disagreement. What was I supposed to do? The entire department was there, Daniel countered, frustration evident in his voice. I'm not asking for public acknowledgement. Just don't treat me like I'm invisible. These moments always resolved with renewed commitment to their relationship and creative adjustments to their arrangements. They established alternate meeting places, developed coded language for communications, and found ways to support each other's work without crossing professional lines in public. The discovery, when it came, arrived from an unexpected quarter. Professor Elaine Winters, chair of the English department and Daniel's longtime colleague, noticed patterns. Emma's repeated appearances near Daniel's office, despite having no courses with him that semester, subtle changes in Daniel's demeanor, the way their eyes occasionally met during department events with an intimacy that transcended academic rapport. On a rainy April afternoon, Elaine confronted Daniel in his office, closing the door firmly behind her. "How long has it been going on, Daniel?" she asked without preamble, her expression a mixture of disappointment and concern. The question hung in the air between them. Daniel's initial impulse to deny everything fading as he recognized the futility of lies. "She's not my student anymore," he said finally, a technical truth that did little to mitigate the situation. "But she's still a doctoral candidate in this department, and you're still faculty. You know the policies." Elaine sighed, removing her glasses. "The university has rules for a reason. Rules that treat adults with decades of life experience the same as undergraduates," Daniel argued, heat entering his voice. "Emma is 34 years old, Elaine. She had a career before coming here. This isn't some predatory situation. It doesn't matter. Perception is reality in academia. If the administration finds out, then what? They'll ruin my career and derail her education because two consenting adults fell in love?" The word love hung between them, Daniel realizing too late the depth of emotion he had revealed. Elaine's expression softened slightly. "Is that what this is? Not just an affair?" Daniel ran a hand through his graying hair. "It's more than I ever expected to find at this point in my life." The conversation with the Elaine set in motion events beyond their control. Rumors spread despite her promise of discretion, whispers moving through department corridors with increasing elaboration. By mid-May, Daniel and Emma faced an impossible choice: end their relationship or face official investigation. "I could transfer to another university," Emma suggested during a tense discussion in her apartment, surrounded by stacks of research materials for her dissertation. Daniel shook his head. "And start over again? You're 2 years into your program here. Your committee is assembled, your research direction established. Then what's the alternative? You resign your position after 20 years? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibilities, sacrifices neither wanted to demand of the other. "Perhaps there's another way," Daniel said finally. "We could go public, on our terms." Emma stared at him, disbelief evident in her expression. "Deliberately expose ourselves to scrutiny and judgment. Hiding has only fueled speculation, and maybe transparency is our best defense." What followed was the most difficult period of their relationship. Daniel formally disclosed their involvement to the university administration, triggering an ethics review. Emma faced uncomfortable questions from fellow students and faculty, some supportive, but others openly critical. They endured separate interviews with the ethics committee, explaining the timeline of their relationship and the steps they had taken to maintain academic integrity. The university community polarized around the issue. Some faculty members defended the couple, arguing that the policy against faculty-student relationships was being applied too rigidly in a case involving mature adults. Others maintained that any such relationship inherently involved power dynamics that couldn't be ignored, regardless of age or circumstances. In the midst of this controversy, Emma and Daniel discovered unexpected strengths in their relationship. The pressure that might have destroyed a more casual connection instead crystallized their commitment. They learned to face criticism together, to distinguish between legitimate concerns and petty judgments, to find humor in absurd assumptions about their relationship. "Did you hear the latest?" Emma asked one evening, curled beside Daniel on his sofa. "Apparently, I'm pursuing you to secure a prestigious fellowship. Daniel laughed despite the situation. That's a new one. Yesterday, I overheard someone suggesting I was having a midlife crisis. If this is your midlife crisis, it's remarkably intellectual, she replied, kissing him lightly. Most men just buy sports cars. The Ethics Committee delivered its findings in June, a formal reprimand for Daniel, and a requirement that Emma complete her doctoral work under completely different faculty supervision. It was less severe than termination or expulsion, which some had feared, but still carried professional consequences. News of their relationship eventually reached beyond campus, becoming a brief sensation in academic circles and even local media. Professor-student Romance Rocks University proclaimed one particularly dramatic headline, accompanied by separate photos of Daniel and Emma clearly taken without their knowledge. They weathered this exposure together, declining interview requests and focusing on their work rather than public perception. Gradually, the attention faded as newer controversies emerged to capture interest. By late summer, as campus prepared for a new academic year, their relationship had become yesterday's news. Daniel adjusted to his diminished standing among certain colleagues, finding solace in teaching and research. Emma progressed with her dissertation under new advisors, her academic work strengthened rather than hindered by the experience. "Do you ever regret going public?" Emma asked Daniel one evening as they sat on the porch of a small cottage they had rented for a weekend getaway, watching fireflies illuminate the gathering darkness. Daniel considered the question, his arm around her shoulders. "I regret the pain it caused, particularly for you, but not the outcome. Even with the reprimand in your file, the jokes from students who think they're being subtle, even with all that," he confirmed, "some prices are worth paying." As fall returned to Westfield University, bringing new students and renewed academic energy, Daniel and Emma continued navigating their unusual position in the community. They no longer hid their relationship, but maintained professional distance on campus, conscious of lingering sensitivities. Some colleagues avoided them, others offered quiet support. Students varied in their reactions, though most were more interested in their own concerns than faculty romances. Elaine Winters, who had first confronted Daniel about their relationship, stopped by his office one afternoon in October. "The Ethics Committee is reviewing the faculty-student relationship policy," she informed him, lingering in the doorway. "Your case raised questions about whether age and prior professional experience should be considered as factors." Daniel looked up from the papers he was grading. "Are you suggesting our situation might actually change something?" "I'm suggesting that rigid rules sometimes require reconsideration," Elaine replied. "Systems evolve when challenged by exceptions that force us to examine underlying principles." That evening, Daniel shared this conversation with Emma as they prepared dinner in her apartment, which was gradually accumulating more of his books and belongings as their lives intertwined. "So we might become a case study in academic ethics," Emma said, chopping vegetables with precise movements. "That's ironic considering how we met." "Life rarely follows theoretical frameworks," Daniel observed, reaching around her for wine glasses. "That's what makes teaching literature so interesting, the gap between ethical principles and lived experience." Emma turned to face him, knife temporarily set aside. Perhaps that's what shocked everyone most. Not that rules were broken, but that the reality challenged their assumptions about why those rules exist. Daniel nodded, understanding her point. They expected a predatory relationship or calculated advantage seeking. Instead, Instead, they found two people who recognized something in each other worth protecting, Emma finished. Something genuine. As autumn deepened around Westfield University, Daniel and Emma continued building their life together, not without difficulties or lingering consequences, but with a clarity born of having faced public scrutiny and emerged intact. Their relationship had transformed from secret to scandal, to finally simply one unusual love story among many in the university's long history. In December, exactly 1 year after that pivotal moment in the cafe when they had first acknowledged their feelings, Daniel took Emma back to the same bookstore where their relationship had truly begun. Among shelves of literature that had brought them together, he presented her with the first edition of poetry they both treasured. Inside the cover, he had written a simple inscription, "To Emma, who taught me that some lessons can't be found in books, with love and gratitude for the courage to begin again." Emma traced the words with her fingertip, then looked up at the man who had risked his carefully constructed life for an unexpected chance at love. "Some would say we did everything wrong," she said softly. "And yet," Daniel replied, taking her hand, "I've never been more certain of what's right." Outside, snow began to fall, covering the town in silence as they moved together between the bookshelves. Two souls who had found each other despite circumstances, judgment, and their own initial resistance. A teacher and student whose greatest lesson had nothing to do with literature and everything to do with authentic living, regardless of who might be shocked along the way.